Today is the fourth Sunday in Ordinary Time. Jesus was not welcome in Bethlehem when he was born. He was not welcome in Samaritan territory when traveling through it. He was not welcomed by the religious leaders of his day. He was not welcomed by the rich man who Jesus called to follow him. And as we heard today, he is rejected in his hometown. There are lots of excuses made by those who reject Jesus or do not welcome him. In Bethlehem, there was no room in the inn. For the Samaritans, you are not one of us. For his hometown people, you are one of us. For the religious leaders, we don't like what you are teaching. For the rich man who wanted to follow Jesus, you are asking me too much. Every human being is called to make a choice, to follow Jesus or to leave him, to follow his words to guide us, his life to inspire us, his resurrection to give us life, or to reject him, to reject what he is offering, the meaning of life and eternal life itself. It is easy to make excuses like those who encountered Jesus in his hometown, or as he made his way through the ways and the byways of Israel. It is not easy for any person to say to Jesus, yes, unconditionally. I give you my all, and I trust in you. And yet, that is what Jesus asks of us. For either we rely on Christ, or we rely on our own self-sufficiency, which ultimately, because we are human, will someday fail us. We heard in the first reading that God knows us through and through. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. This means God already knows our weaknesses, but he also knows what we are capable of becoming. He will never ask you to do something of which you are incapable. In the case of the prophet Jeremiah, God proclaims, before you were born, I dedicated you. A prophet to the nations, I appointed you. So God had big plans for Jeremiah. God also has big plans for all of us. He made us, he knows us, and he calls us. And the first step is to say yes to his call. But we need to be aware that just as people made excuses in Jesus' day, we also can make excuses today. Or our response to his call can be half-hearted. Consider his initial rejection in Bethlehem when he was born. There is no room in the inn. Consider that the inn is your heart. When we say there is no room in the inn, we mean there is no room in my heart for Jesus. My heart is filled with things other than Jesus. Anxieties, vices, bad habits, plans that don't involve Jesus. There is no room in the inn. The response of his hometown is, who is he? We know his family. This is to say, in our day, we find you boring. You don't wow me the way I want you to. I'm not really interested in following you. And then the townspeople chose violence and attempted to kill Jesus by throwing him off a cliff. For many today, rejecting Jesus is the violence of indifference. I don't need you. Leave me alone. The response of the rich man invited to follow Jesus was, you're asking too much of me. I'm willing to follow, but not to give my all to you." This is the response of those who have reflected on what Jesus is asking, but are reluctant to say yes, after carefully considering what they will have to sacrifice if they say yes to what Jesus is calling them to. Like the rich man, enthusiastic to follow Jesus, but when he comes to realization of what Jesus is asking, he walks away sad. A final group can be considered those who are willing to say yes to Jesus, and they do say yes, but they give up along the way. Remember the parable about the one who was planning to build a tower. Jesus said, "Which of you, wishing to construct a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if there is enough for its completion? Otherwise, after laying the foundation and finding himself unable to finish the work, the onlookers should laugh at him and say, 'This one began to build, but did not have the resources to finish.'" In this case, the demands of discipleship are only realized once the journey with Jesus has begun. Remember, the context in Luke that Jesus was talking about was to take up your cross and follow him. Jesus warns his followers that the enthusiasm to follow him will fade once the demands of discipleship come into focus. Peter said, "I will never deny you," only to deny him 3 times that very night. Saying yes is easy. Doing yes is difficult. Difficult, but not impossible with God's grace. The tipping point in today's gospel comes when Jesus uses 2 examples of pagans who exhibited more faith than those in Israel. The widow in Sidon, who shares her food with Elijah and then is blessed by God, and Naaman, the Syrian, a leper, who professes faith in God and is cured of leprosy. The townspeople of Nazareth immediately realize that he is pointing out their own lack of faith. They refuse to believe in Jesus. They know him too well. And their reaction is violence. And Jesus walks away. And he will journey to other towns to preach the good news.